Good morning, everyone. My name is Menja Chaler, and I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at City University of New York, and a co-founder of the Queer European Asylum Network. We at the Queer European Asylum Network, or QUEEN as we like to call it, are thrilled that you're joining us today for what promises to be an important and stimulating conversation around the Dublin III return system and the challenges and risks such poses for LGBTQI asylum claimants and refugees within the EU borders. So today we have the immense privilege to be hearing from thinkers, practitioners, and activists who have devoted their intellectual, personal, and professional resources to amplify the concerns, as well as good practices around queer asylum law and policy in Europe. Europe currently faces an increasing threat of autocratic political regimes and civil movements that are determined to restrict the rights and freedoms of LGBTQI persons. These movements and politics become particularly relevant for the conversations to be held at this symposium today, when considered in conjunction with the increasing militarization of EU borders, as well as the increasing criminalization of irregular migrants within and outside the EU. So the questions that animate this one-day symposium concern the protection of human rights standards for LGBTQI refugees and asylum seekers living in EU reception countries. This symposium will touch upon the lived experiences of queer asylum claimants with Dublin III, as well as the possibilities for solidarity between LGBTQI support organizations located in Eastern and Western Europe. So before we delve into the first panel, I'd like to say a few thank yous. On behalf of QUEEN, I would like to express my immense gratitude to my co-organizers of today's event. These are Irene Chen, Lily Draza, Daniel Čubelić, and Mohamed Dalla. Without their conceptual and moral support, this event would not have been possible. I would also like to thank our illustrious panelists who have so generously agreed to dedicate their time and knowledge to this symposium, as well as Ronja, who has brought the urgency of the topic of today's symposium to my attention. Last but surely not least, I would like to thank the Gunda Werner Institute for their generous support. Specifically, I express my gratitude to Julia Hartleb for bearing with me as I navigate the administrative dimension of this event, and Dr. Ines Kappert, the director of the Gunda Werner Institute, for her incredible trust in QUEEN and her friendship. Thank you so much, Ines, and may I give you the word now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Menja. I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to this international conference Kian made possible again. Since 2 years, you managed to do exactly what, or to implement exactly what the Gunda Werner Institute is here for, namely to bring together activists, politics, and scholars, and thus to, with the goal to overcome human rights violation and to enabling sexual self-determination, which is, of course, a human right. So since 2 years, you gave us the chance to learn a lot, and you managed to bring the situation of queer refugees into the political discourse. And we all know that this is not an easy thing, and it's amazing that you managed it. So I'm grateful that we can support you, and I'm grateful that this second international conference will take place now. I'm sure that we will learn again a lot, and I'm happy that this important political work will continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ines, for your really humbling words. And I think this goes for everyone who has put their efforts into all these events that we've been organizing over the last few years. I think it really brings out the strength of collectivity and also the strengths of interdisciplinarity in working with activists and researchers and practitioners. And I'm extremely grateful for all of those who have contributed so far, and I'm looking forward to future endeavors. And of course, for the panel today, which I'm really, really excited 4. But before we delve into this panel, I would like to mention a few housekeeping rules. So the panel will feature 2 rounds. Today's panel will feature 2 rounds of interventions outlining the challenges and recommendations regarding queer asylum and the Dublin III return system. After that, we'll have then about 30 minutes left for Q&A in the end. So you will be able to submit any questions via the Q&A function throughout the webinar. Please be aware that this webinar will be recorded and also live streamed on our Facebook page. So because there are quite a lot of registrations and hopefully a lot of attendees, we might unfortunately not be able to answer all the questions that you might have. And also please note that we're not able to answer any case-specific questions that you have. If you have any questions in regarding to your case, please go to our website, www.queereuropeanasylum.org, where you find resources and further information. Please follow us on Twitter today throughout the symposium at Queer Euro Asylum, and tweet about the symposium using #QueerDublin, #QueerAsylum. So now the housekeeping over. I'm really happy to open the first panel today. Moderating today's panel will be Entitled Protection Standards Criteria for LGBTQI+ asylum claimants for readmission to safe EU third countries under Dublin III is the amazing organizer, activist, and advocate Irene Chen. Irene Chen is a former consultant advisor for global LGBTQI+ refugee protection at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Division of International Protection. She is an international humanitarian and development specialist with over 20 years of experience supporting forcibly displaced people in emergency and non-emergency contexts worldwide. A political sociologist by training and a member of the queer community, she has worked with the United Nations entities, governments, and civil society organizations on protection policies and programs for LGBTQI+ and other refugees. This includes her work on social integration and governance and civil society development initiatives in fragile and stable states. She herself is the daughter of refugees. And Irene, a warm welcome to you. May I hand over the floor to you now?
Sure. Thank you so much, Menja. It's really an honor, or a true honor for me to be with all of you today. I would like to thank the Queer European Asylum Network and the Grunde Institute for inviting me to join this really critical and timely discussion. And I'm really honored and grateful to be able to participate. Before I go on, I just want to note that during the discussion, we will be using the term LGBTIQ+, and I know that this is not universally used across all the agencies and organizations that are with us today. So basically, this is just a term to refer to people of diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. And we appreciate that this is not a universally used term. Some organizations, such as ELENI, the Council of Europe SOGI unit, are using sexual orientation and gender identity, and that is also fine. So if you hear me kind of switching back and forth between those two acronyms, just, please bear with us. So before I get started, I just want to give a very quick snapshot before we go on and introduce you all to our esteemed panelists today. As you know, right now we have over 82 million people who are forcibly displaced worldwide, the highest number since the Second World War. This includes over 12 million in Europe, which hosts over 6.5 million recognized refugees, over 1 million asylum seekers, 2 million internally displaced people, and nearly 500,000 people who are stateless or undocumented. And at the same time, there are globally almost 70 UN member states that criminalize consensual same-sex relations among adults. Two additional states criminalize de facto, 6 prescribe the death penalty, 13 have laws that criminalize trans and gender nonconforming people, and another 37 target trans people through vagrancy, prostitution, morality, and other such laws. Within this context, Europe has long been regarded as a global standard setter when it comes to upholding the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer persons within its jurisdictions through the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as through its efforts to set out a unified, coherent, open, and fair system for ensuring international protection to forcibly displaced people in its territories through the Common European Asylum System, otherwise known as Dublin III. In late June of this year, so nearly 1 year after the EU's new pact on asylum and migration was presented by the European Commission, European Parliament and the European Commission confirmed agreement on a mandate to re-establish the European Asylum Support Office as the European Union Agency for Asylum with an enhanced mandate to implement the Common European Asylum System under Dublin III. I quote, "It is a significant step in creating the world's only multinational asylum system." However, as mentioned earlier, in recent years, we have been witnessing the increasing politicization of both forced displacement and SOGI human rights in Europe, with often devastating consequences for people who seek safety in Europe from persecution linked to their real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. If we think about what happened yesterday in the English Channel when a dinghy capsized, 27 people lost their lives tragically. You may also think about the very recent standoff on the border between Belarus and Poland, in which a number of asylum seekers were caught in the middle. And with regard to SOGI rights, which Eleni will touch on in her presentation, out of the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, there are at least 10 that do present barriers to even the freedom of expression on this type of topic, which is to say that LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers in Europe do face multiple intersection challenges, and they are among the most marginalized and in many ways vulnerable groups of forcibly displaced people today. So given the complexity of this situation and of the ecosystems in which it is evolving, it would appear that to ensure the protection of LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers and refugees in Europe, this will require the courage, creativity, and commitment of a very broad range of people, including yourselves, who work across sectors, geographies, and cultures. So we're very honored today to be joined by 4 experts who will be speaking on the panel and who have very graciously agreed to share a bit of their own experience and perspectives with us. I'm going to begin by introducing our 4 panelists, and I would just request that those of you who don't have your camera on, turn it on so we can all see what you look like. We're going to begin with Sumo. Sumo, are you with us? So while Suma is turning her camera on, I'll just let everybody know Suma is a trans refugee from Egypt, an activist. Hi, Suma, and a consultant. Welcome, Suma, living in Berlin. After having worked as a public relations manager and executive secretary for a dental company, I should also note that Suma is a trained lawyer as well. She worked as the leader of several groups in Europe that work with LGBTIQ plus refugees, including the Tea and Talk group in Istanbul, as a consultant for the Imontes organization, which is based in Athens, and as a previous coordinator for RFSL Stockholm Newcomers Group for LGBTIQ plus refugees. Between 2017 and 2019, Suma has served as a board member of Transfest Stockholm, Trans Newcomer Stockholm. She co-founded several LGBTQI plus asylum networks, including Transgender Europe's Trans Refugee Network. And during the last 3 years, Suma has been a guest lecturer at DIS Study Abroad in Scandinavia, where she has taught students about the very specific challenges that trans refugees face. Welcome to Suma.
Thank you.
Next, allow me to introduce you to Rania Carroll, a mediator and lawyer with an LLM in European law. After previous positions in Frankfurt and Geneva, since 2015, Rania has been working in Munich as a lawyer specialized in asylum law with an increased focus on the LGBTIQ+ community. She considers herself not only a lawyer, but also as a consultant and an integrator for asylum seekers of all kinds. She would like to create awareness for the implications of the Dublin procedure as they impact LGBTIQ+ refugees and asylum seekers specifically. Welcome, Ryan. Next, may I introduce Akram Kubanich-Bekov, whom some of you may know is the Senior Advocacy Officer at ILGA Europe, also trained in international human rights law. Akram works on developing and implementing advocacy strategies and policy initiatives aimed to bring legal, political, and social change for LGBTI people across Europe and Central Asia. LGBTI asylum and migration are some of the key thematic areas of his work. And prior to joining ILGA Europe, Akram also worked in the UN in the regional office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Central Asia, and has been involved in queer activism for nearly 15 years. Welcome, Akram. Finally, we have the great honor and pleasure to introduce Eleni Tseteku, a lawyer and specialist on minority issues and vulnerable groups. Eleni is joining us as the head of the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Unit of the Council of Europe, whose mission is to fight against discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression and sex characteristics in Europe. Eleni previously served in the Council of Europe on Roma and Travelers, where she was responsible for the promotion of integration policies and inclusion policies in the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, and Roma women and girls were a particular focus of this work. So please give a silent round of Zoom applause for our 4 panelists. And with that, shall we begin with a discussion of the key challenges that each of you feel LGBTIQ+ displaced people face in Europe, and also some of the challenges you face in your work to support them. So we're going to start with Suma, and then we're going to go next to Rania, Akram, and culminate with Eleni in order of progressively increasing scope. Okay, so Suma, as a trans refugee who has lived in several European asylum countries and who has had a very extraordinary journey in your own search for safety and dignity, could you share with us some of the experiences that you and other LGBTIQ+ asylum claimants and refugees have lived through under the Dublin III regime? Thank you.
Yes, first I would like to say that I'm so happy to be here with all of you today, and extremely happy to be able to talk about Dublin regulations, because this is something been very annoying for the last 5 years. I've been working, I left my Egypt 5 years ago, and I started my activism work. As Irini mentioned, that I started groups in Athens, Sweden, for supporting LGBT refugees and networks in Europe. And this been like a huge issue. People, when they get forced, LGBT refugees, when they get forced to be displaced, this is something not easy. They need to seek safety where they cannot be reached by their family members, their relatives, their friends, people they used to know in their home countries. So it's difficult to be in the country that you've been able to get visa to, like, for example, if some family member send me an invitation to any European country and I go to that country and I'm afraid to stay there because I need to seek asylum and I had to move to another European country. So Dublin regulations will send me back in an unhuman way. I had a case in Sweden. She was a trans woman from Syria. She traveled to with her family to Germany, and she couldn't stay with her family because of her safety. And she'd been sent back to Sweden, from Sweden to Germany, to the same city. And she had to stay in the same camp because this was the only camp in the city. And she had to be reunited again with her family. And we lost the contact with her. She couldn't be sent back. And they didn't listen. They didn't consider her, the risk of her life. And they told her literally, the police can protect you. And the police, we all know, they need time to arrive. And I need a chance to be able to call the police. So this is not applied. And actually, since she been sent back to Germany, we lost the contact with her. And before she sent back, she was in the detention camp. Usually Dublin units, they give their decisions within 3 weeks, and maximum you need like 3 to 6 months to be able to send back to the country you entered first. And the country, they consider this country should examine your case. This is not fair. And when a Dublin regulation goes to LGBT cases, it doesn't serve its purpose because they have reasons to move. Like, for example, my case, I have residency in Greece where I didn't get anything. I've been abused so many times. And I moved to Sweden, and they couldn't give a decision right away within 3 weeks. And we had similar cases, they gave the decision within 3 weeks, but I had to wait 8 months because they were confused. They couldn't decide and they couldn't justify the decision. So, and I've been, the returning way wasn't really, like, they lied to my face. I asked them, how would I face the Greek police because I'm afraid of the Greek police? I will cooperate, but would you hand me over to the police? And they said, no, we don't care. As long as you are in the plane, we don't care. And actually, when the plane landed, the police arrested me on the entrance of the plane. So they lied to my face and they asked me to cooperate, but they lied. They didn't cooperate. And then they told me, we cannot say another European country is not safe, and due to Dublin regulations, we have to send you back. I moved to Germany again because I cannot stay in a country where I cannot feel safe and I cannot get basic support as asylum seeker. In Germany, I am waiting now for 24 months for a decision because Dublin unit itself, they cannot give a decision. The people who are supposed to be expert in Dublin regulation, they cannot give a decision. So this is really very weird. I am now no decision yet, and I have to wait, like, I don't know for how long, forever maybe. So, and this is really, from the Dublin units in the migration offices, they cannot decide because we reached the point that Dublin regulation cannot be effective for LGBT cases. Things has changed a lot. And if it works with some cases, the main thing of Dublin regulation, as I understood, that they don't want the refugees to be able to move around Europe freely, and they all go to one country and leave the other countries without not handling cases for refugees. And this is not helping the LGBT cases at all. People been abused in some countries. I had cases from France. They are from Algeria and they moved to France and they moved to different cities. And in each city, they meet a family member or a neighbor. it's been difficult for them, and they went to Sweden and they've been sent back because due to Dublin regulations, and it was also escorted by the police in the plane. Another case also went to, they've been sent back to Greece with the police escorted on the plane as if they are international criminals, which is make us, we are LGBT refugees, they are used to be afraid of the police. And suddenly I have to be seated near to the police in the plane, transported and handed over to the police in the other country. This is something destroy the mental states for the refugees. And we've been talking about cases like this, so trying to support them psychologically, which is difficult. Also, in Dublin regulation, there is one excuse. When you have a family members or a wife, a brother, an uncle, a father, you can go to that country and the Dublin regulations will not apply in your case. I was reading this morning, and this is really difficult because LGBT refugees, they are escaped from their families. So we've been denied that right. That excuse, we've been denied. We cannot use this as an excuse because we don't have, our friends consider our family. Our boyfriends and girlfriends consider our family. So it's not allowed. I had a case in Netherlands and they need to move to Sweden to be with his boyfriend, and they didn't consider, they asked him for marriage certificate. They came both of the, one from Iraq and one from Syria, and they need them to get a birth certificate from Iraq or Syria to move to live together. This is make things not right. For me, if someone asked me get a marriage certificate for your boyfriend from Egypt, how could I do this? It's impossible. So when they have excuses, we are not included in this excuse. And we cannot, they don't consider our friends who've been together for years, our family. They don't consider boyfriend or girlfriend. And this is totally wrong. And as I mentioned before, if a family member send me an invitation to come, I cannot stay in this country. I'm afraid this country is here. They said move to another cities, try to find out, but it's like in the communities, it would be easy to find me. And it's really easy for the families, the relatives to take, you are a big shame for them. So they act aggressively when they found out that you belong to the LGBT community. Also, a case has been written in the detention camps. The detention camps, they put the people in the detention camps in unhuman situation for the LGBT mainly because they have to be housed with people they've been coming from the same background they came from the same country. They are not safe. They've been attacked a lot. And we had cases in Sweden in the detention camp, and we've been trying to support. It's not easy to visit. It's not a crime to try to move to another country to seek protection because you have reasons. It's not, you are not like need to take a trip to other city. We need safety. And this is why we left our countries. Most of LGBT refugees, when they leave, when they've been forced to be displaced, they didn't do this because they need to get better life. We need to get the basics because we couldn't have in our countries. There is no police to protect me. There is no healthcare to support me as a trans person, or there is nothing. So we need to get the basics. When we try to get the basics, they are like, this is Dublin regulation, go back. And there is countries like in the border countries, as they like, I don't like to name any country, this is bad and this is good, but the border countries cannot get, because of the huge numbers of refugees going there, they cannot give the support the refugees needed. So they move and Dublin regulations send them back. So I think if we need to talk about this, if I need to give any recommendations, and I'm sorry, I have to give my recommendations early because I have to go. But my recommendation is the reasons should be considered. Any friend we confirm our friendship, both of us, it should be considered as a family member, because why they are united, the families, because these people take care of each other and support each other. So my friend been supporting me for years before we come to Europe. And now I need still to be with my friend I consider my family. So reasons should be considered. We should have the right to get access to the excuses in the Dublin regulations. Also, if I think Dublin regulations has, from my perspective, to be deactivated against LGBT cases, because when we said reasons, our reasons should be considered, it will be relevant. So there would not be a specific rules they would follow. It would be up to the case officer to decide. So still it would be lost. So if I have like the power to do something about Dublin regulations, I think I would deactivate Dublin regulations against LGBT cases. And thank you for giving me the time to talk. And thank you really for listening and being here for us today.
Wow, thank you so much, Suma. We're sorry that you're going to have to leave us early. What a powerful testimony of, someone who's lived through the way the Dublin regulation is actually implemented in multiple parts of Europe. And I wish we had a little bit more time with you to really dig deeper into some of these challenges that you and other LGBTIQ+ asylum seekers and refugees have experienced, particularly on the question of family reunification, which I think is a much broader question. I'd love to hear what our other three panelists have to say about that and other aspects of reconciling credibility assessments with European human rights standards. So anyway, Suma, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Suma is available to be contacted by email for anyone who wishes to get in touch with questions. So we will post that in the chat during the seminar. So we'll let you go, Suma, to your next appointment.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take good care. So following on what Suma has just shared, the criminalization of movement, it sounds like, let's turn to Rania. Rania, as an asylum lawyer, working very closely with immigration authorities and also security authorities, what has your experience been like representing LGBTIQ+ asylum claimants in Germany, not only as a lawyer, but also as an advocate for safe and dignified integration? So what are some of the implications of the Dublin procedure that you've witnessed?
First of all, I really say thank you to Menja that she listened to me when I brought up this topic to her ears, because this is really something I feel we need more to discuss about, because as we got the testimonial of Zuma, the Dublin III is completely in opposite of what those LGBTIQ+ refugees they expect of our asylum system. So I want to start a little bit to introduce myself, because I moved back to Germany in 2015, coming from another country where Germany faced this what we call wave of refugees, where in Europe there was this big moving. And as I came also to Germany, not as a refugee, for other reasons, I got in touch with the camp close where I moved to, and in the discussion, and and I raised up the topic of asylum seekers in Europe in somehow from the bottom up, because I started with a volunteer and working there, and so the first touch I really got was really basically in a camp. We started with in a tent condition over there, really basic on. Now it's a building, but I'm still in good touch with those or a couple of refugees of this time. So in the beginning, I was more in the general problem, but I started soon in having the contact. What do they are facing on in problems with the administrations? What Suma also brought up. And then I started more. They realized that I'm in somehow specialized, and then all of a sudden it started. I was in the beginning more with Afghanistans and Iraqis. So then all of a sudden the social workers they recommended me, and I really was kind of popped into this LGBTI plus problems. Because I got in touch with some social workers from Fürstenfeldbruck, which is called an Umkehrzentrum in Germany, and that's really which is very difficult. And so one of the sudden I was really smashed into these different problems of, yes, Dublin, but LGBTIQ asylum problems in general, even if they are already passed, and that was very interesting. And more for me, that I realized that this Dublin is really something which is in top what they are already facing on. And that was so weird for me, because I realized that in somehow Germany is using this Dublin III, I felt more like as an instrument to get rid of refugees. That's something that we have somehow to realize. All of a sudden it showed me up when I got a map to Europe. And I was asking myself, why did Germany agreed at the time to the Dublin III accordings? And I said, yes, for sure, because Germany is in the middle of all those countries, and they are more and less counting through the effect that few number of refugees will finally end up in their country. That was probably basically the main idea for what they said. Wow, that's a fantastic idea, this Dublin III according, because we are in the middle. So all the border countries, they will manage. And the idea of solidarity, and in terms of really sharing all those refugees on a European context, that's what I never felt as that's the intention. How Dublin is organized also. So that's in getting in it as a lawyer. All of a sudden, you realize that here in Germany, really the Dublin is really only based on the formalities. So really in seeing that we are respecting the delays given by the regulation, and seeing that we see that, you know, we try to get the decision in the delay of 3 months, so that we can really continue in organizing everything that we transfer the people. So that's really something which made me really sad, because if you have a look to the regulation, the first problem which shows up if it's organized as formal system, the word LGBTIQ is not showing up in the regulation itself. That's what Suma already mentioned, is the only group who's really kind of taken care actually in the system or mentioned is families. But the definition of family is weird, and is really what Suma said for trans, even unuseful. So that's what I realized was the first problem for me as a lawyer in facing on the administration, to really explain them that we are talking about a vulnerable group who is also under the protection of the Dublin III regulation. So that was really something I felt, wow. And then the next problem we are always facing is how in this Dublin procedure, how do they are screened? Families are visible immediately when they come to those camp. A pregnant mother, you can almost see that a child is a child of. You can see the difference between 3 or 4 years, but might not be visible, but at least with all those LGBTIQs, yeah, the trans probably, and they get immediately faced problems, but homosexual, lesbians, they do not look, and it gets even more difficult because they, from their behavior in the camp surrounding, they even try more to hide in not getting be outed. So what I do realize, at least for Germany, I'm so sorry, but to grab experience for the other European countries is that's for me actually not really possible. But I was in preparing this panel today. I checked, already the catalog of questions, what they do, because in the Dublin regulation we do have, we have implemented that there is a first hearing for the people, but actually for those hearings there's absolutely no approach to those a part that they might be part of a vulnerable group. All those questions, they are only focused by the idea in which other country they had been, or did they already applied in another country for the asylum, already for asylum. So I do realize that when I was really shocked, because I got a really highly traumatized guy in front of me, and I was already happy that obviously the interviewer in the Dublin interview realized that this guy is really traumatized. He came to Europe with a visa for Italy, so he was sending him back with a delay of 2 weeks to bring more psychology medical reports. And I said, 2 weeks, that's mission impossible. Even if you need in Germany, first of all, you need an appointment with an expert, and you need to find somebody who is able to speak English. And so I thought, in really applying for a prolongation of the delay, we might really, first of all, earn time. And I had to figure out that with this 3 months delay, Italy was not answering. Poof, the decision turned out, and I was in the nightmare of Dublin. And then the next problem, what we as lawyers, we are completely also facing on, is that the regulation is not giving us the opportunity to bring those cases really in front of court, because the claiming system, what's established, is so and somehow mean, because in this way of remedies, in terms Germany has chosen the way that if I do claim, I do not have automatically a suspension effect. If I apply also for a suspension effect, I'm in the entire way that I'm in somehow depending on the court that they decide, and this kind of transfer delay of 6 months, what we do have is really cancelled and stopped. So for the safetiness or for the needs of those refugees, it's not helping me. And then the next very difficult point is, and that's also something what's implemented in the regulation, is that the regulation was based on the idea that all those member countries, they are fulfilling the humanitarian criteria. And so it is it's such a high barrier to explain to court that really a transfer of those people to those other European countries is against that. I normally really recommend the people okay, you need to go through those nightmare of seek and hide, what I say, over those 6 months, up that Germany is then responsible for the case. The last point I want to add is I do also see chances in the regulations, and that's what we also tried a little bit with the LSVD in Cologne now to bring in awareness that we have not this, as Suma mentioned, the family part. We have the Article 17, which is the discretionary clause. And in my opinion, that should be really kind of promoted for something we should establish as, once we have them, seeked out or screened as part of the LGBTIQ community, that we should discuss with those people where they want to stay, why they want to stay, and to use this part in terms of making them feeling better.
Well, thank you so much, Rania, for sharing your very challenging experiences having to navigate, I think, the administrative uncertainties or quagmires that you can encounter under this asylum regime. I'm really struck by what you said about the fact that LGBTIQ+ does not actually show up in the Dublin texts as a category of protected group. And it sounds like from your experience that invisibility also translates into practice, and it renders even more invisible the abuse that a lot of LGBTIQ+ people experience in those detention centers that you've worked in, right? Because to protect themselves physically and emotionally, some may try to conceal their sexual orientation or gender identity, etc., which does not make it easier to recognize administratively or on a policy level the real challenges that they face. And I find it really interesting, the suggestion on using this discretionary clause to better address, perhaps through strategic targeting, the needs of LGBTQI+ people that are in displacement situations in Europe. And would love to hear more about that when we get to the recommendation section. Also, Eleni, you have just mentioned that you're having some difficulty hearing people. Can everyone hear? Can people let the moderators know if they can hear all the speakers? Okay. So with all the kind of procedural and political challenges that Rania has brought up, from remedies to a perception that perhaps some countries in Europe are using the common European asylum system as a way to keep refugees out of their countries, why don't we move to Akram? Akram, you represent one of the most influential LGBTQI+ human rights organizations in Europe. Could you help us understand a little bit how ill-good Europe approaches the asylum policy in the European Union, what are some of the protection standards and challenges that you have seen LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers go through under Dublin III? Probably as many of them would reach out to ILGA Europe for support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Irene, for the question. And hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here digitally with you today and take part in this plenary discussion, and I would like to thank also organizers for inviting ILGA Europe to talk about the challenges for LGBT asylum seekers, specifically under the Dublin III regulation. And as I'm representing ILGA Europe, allow me please introduce ILGA Europe briefly. ILGA Europe are independent, international, non-governmental umbrella organization, bringing over 600 organizations from 54 countries in Europe and Central Asia. We are part of wider international ILGA organization, but ILGA Europe is established as a separate organization, operating in the region of Europe and Central Asia. So on our approach to the policy, so that we work on the standard setting and advancing legislation on the European level, and with our members at the national level. We also support them in improving laws and practices at the national levels through advocacy, strategic litigation, up to European Court of Justice or European Court of Human Rights. And so this is briefly about ILGA Europe. And I would like to start with some of the protection standards for LGBT asylum seekers that are provided under the EU asylum law that are relevant to the Dublin regulation. And I will also touch mostly what is under the Dublin regulation, because if we will talk about all the protection standards, it will be, I think, taking hours. So that's why my intervention will be really very focused. So throughout the Dublin procedure, the regulation provides a number of guarantees for applicants at their rights. And these include right to information, that at the very beginning, as soon as application for the international protection is lodged, a member state should inform about all the procedures and all the rights the applicant is having in the language that they will understand. If it's needed, they should also provide the translation. These are the standards, which can be a little bit differently understood by different member states and implemented differently, although regulation means that these provisions have direct effect in all EU member states. And then also they should have like personal interviews. A personal interview with the applicant should be organized to facilitate so determination of the member states responsible for who will be reviewing the application for the international protection. And then there is a special guarantees for minors, because we also see that some LGBT minors also might be reaching out to the Europe and seeking for the protection. So prioritizing children's best interests throughout the procedure and increase the protection for applicants, children, family members, dependents, persons or relatives. It's all related to the families. And here I would like to specifically highlight what's the best interest for the child. If a child is not, for example, LGBT child, family is not accepting, then they should consider that if it's the best for the child to live with the family who are not accepting identity of this child. And of course, what was touched already, it was the obligation to guarantee the right to appeal against a transfer decision. And the member states should also provide legal assistance free of charge. And upon request at the appeal stage, some countries do it automatically. So these, in addition to these provisions, the Dublin III regulation makes a provision for vulnerability as a factor which may influence operation of the responsibility criteria. So as we know, there's a responsibility criteria which makes family and then country of entry and etc. So there's hierarchy, and following that they find the responsible country. And as it was already touched by the Ronya, Article 17, Part 1, is known as a sovereignty clause, and then permits a Dublin state to decide to examine claim for international protection, even if it's not responsible for any other reasons laid down in the Dublin III regulation. So in other words, this provision concerns a situation where there are exceptional compassionate circumstances, such as individual human rights considerations, that justify the exercise of discretion to examine asylum claim in the given state. For example, Germany can decide, okay, or Sweden can decide, okay, in the Greece, human rights standards are not really great for the LGBT people, so that's why we can we will take the charge of this case, and then we will consider it here without using the Dublin. And here also some guidance was provided by the Court of Justice and European Court of Human Rights, and I will touch upon only at the moment one of those, that court considered that transfer in itself can entail a real risk of inhuman and degrading treatment within the meaning of Article 4 of the Charter, and notably in circumstances where the transfer of asylum claimant with a particularly serious mental or physical conditions leads to the applicant's health significantly deteriorating. And in these standards, they also have, so therefore the authorities of transferring state must take into account objective factors such as medical certificates, which are capable of demonstrating the particular seriousness of person's illness and the significant and irreversible consequences that transfer may result in. And furthermore, in operational terms, the member state transferring an applicant to the responsible member state is also under an obligation to provide the receiving country with the necessary information about in order to safeguard the applicant's rights about immediate special needs post-transfer. For example, if the person needs some kind of medical intervention or any other needs, and here again, a special mention is made of vulnerable groups such as disabled persons, elderly people, pregnant women, minors, persons who are being subject to torture, rape, and other serious forms of psychological, physical, and sexual violence. And the last criterion, or maybe last two criteria, are very relevant to LGBT applicants because they often face highest rate of violence and torture cases in the country of origin or on their way, and some of them even face a torture. So, but unfortunately, they cannot understand what's the torture, and that's why these provisions sometimes may not be used. I will touch upon about the in the challenges, that part. And then Article 17 and Part 2, it's also it's called Humanitarian Clause, and it allows to also make an exception for the humanitarian grounds based in particular on family or cultural consideration. And unlike the terms family member and relative, the term relations, which is mentioned here, is not defined in the Dublin III regulation. And the reference to family and cultural consideration in this part of the Article 17 allows Dublin states to exercise their discretion rights to bring together individuals who are part of extended family group recognized in different cultures and countries. And it's very specific to the, it might be relevant to the LGBT people and they're de facto children, depending on the interpretation of the member state. And then there is also the notion of vulnerability can be a primary consideration in the assessment of the legality of Dublin transfer per se. So that need for transfer to comply with the Charter, and then European Convention trigger specific obligations on sending countries to ensure that an individual applicant will have access to an asylum procedure and appropriate conditions in the receiving country, according to the provisions set out in relevant EU, in the relevant and namely EU asylum procedure and reception conditions directives. And these safeguards apply to all asylum seekers, but notable judicial interventions in Dublin procedures have highlighted special duties owed to vulnerable groups. But I should note here that so far there was no cases involving LGBT applicants at the court. But considering the case law, this provision can be interpreted as applicable to LGBT applicants. And also several court rulings stress that sending countries have obligation to obtain individual guarantees that the transfer will comply with the standards of the convention and then charter. So these are some protection provisions provided by the EU law for asylum applicants, including LGBT people. And now I would like to highlight some of the impacts of the Dublin system on LGBT applicants. First, I would like to share some examples just of the real cases to demonstrate how regulation can negatively affect LGBT people. And for example, after applicant's family discovered his sexual orientation, he fled his country of origin because he feared his family would kill him. And then he first was in Hungary, then moved to Austria, and then his family also arrived to Austria, and then according to Dublin, he would have to return to the or not to his family arrived to the Hungary as well, and then they under the Dublin they were united. But however, he expressed the concern that Hungary was not accepting and affirming also LGBTI people, and he will there face violence from family members. And I think I will just skip some of them because of the time limitations and just turn into the challenges we see. So as we can see from the mentioned cases by Suma, that one of the main challenges of the Dublin system for LGBT applicants is that the system is built from hetero-cis normative perspective, which creates a system where there's a little understanding of the individual circumstances and needs of LGBT applicants. And this perspective leads to the violation of some of the core principles of the Refugee Convention, such as non-refoulement and then individual assessment of application application protected by the Refugee Convention. And another challenge is the assumption on which is the Dublin III regulation is based, that asylum seekers are afforded equal rights across member states, and each claim gets a fair examination wherever the claim is lodged in the EU. And this is far from being a reality. It was already mentioned by Ronia as well as by Suma. And we should also mention that EU member states have a different level of protection for LGBT asylum seekers and in the field of employment, education, violence, to just name a few. And in addition, there is a lack of compliance on procedural guarantees and safeguards for asylum seekers, which are already set out in the EU asylum law, especially for LGBT applicants, and that procedure is becoming lengthy and outcomes are unpredictable more and more, which in turn, coupled with poor reception countries and social precariousness, have impact on the well-being of LGBT people, and also contributes to the economic and social precarity of the LGBTI people, that sometimes they prefer, as it was already mentioned, that lay low or hide and seek, where they do not get the essential services, and these people are who in many cases have undergone traumatic experiences back home or on their way to the EU. So these are some of the main challenges I wanted to highlight today. Of course, also because of the time limitation. And I will stop my intervention here and looking forward to discuss it further.
Well, thank you so much, Akram, for that very close read of the Dublin III text. And we definitely pick up on the cis heteronormative assumptions that underlie a lot of how that text was created, right? And the whole construction of family as a category, a priority category in the hierarchy of vulnerabilities really shows us from your experience how LGBTIQ plus people's lives are not always well understood according to this framework, right? And then from that basis comes, you know, all the procedural challenges that you mentioned, the lack of compliance among member states, the outcomes being unpredictable, the waiting times getting longer, while the delays, as Rania mentioned earlier, granted for providing increasing amounts of evidence are getting shorter. So could I ask you to help us remember, towards the beginning of your presentation, Akram, you shared some citations from a court ruling. Could you help us remember which case that was for people who might not be familiar with it?
I do not have specifically here. I cannot recall, but there are cases, but I can share later on with Menje, and Menje can just put it out.
Right. Okay, thank you. That would be really helpful. I mean, I think what you've shared with us is very detailed, and I think people would certainly appreciate learning a bit more about the Article 17 Sovereignty Clause and the Humanitarian Clauses that may be helpful. I'm looking at Rania's face though, and thinking that perhaps they're not always very helpful.
Yeah, Irene, I just wanted to also add that it's very rarely used by member states, I should note. Even though this allows to them to exercise their sovereignty rights, but it's very rarely used. But it can be used, what I wanted to highlight.
It can be used, but it's not used. So there's something else going on behind the non-use of that, which brings us to Eleni, who's in a very unique position at the head of the SOGI unit at the Council of Europe, one of the most influential bodies within the EU governance ecosystem on protecting the rights of LGBTIQ plus people on European territory. So it's not an asylum, it's not the asylum office, but the Council of Europe has a very important role in safeguarding these rights. So I'd like to ask you, Eleni, as the director of the Council of Europe's SOGI unit, could you help us understand the COE's role, some key instruments and decisions with respect to LGBTIQ plus refugees and asylum seekers in Europe, as well as the member states' responsibilities to uphold their rights? Thank you. You're on mute. And you're also, can we hear Eleni? Can anybody hear Eleni? Okay. May I call on our technical team, Menja and Mohammed, to help? Because I think Eleni is having a little bit of trouble getting her voice to pick up on Zoom. And she's also I think she's coming in on the link under my name. Okay, while we are sorting out this technical issue, may I, before we move to, we're going to give Eleni and our technical team a minute to try to establish a reconnection of the audio. In the meantime, I have a question for Rania that's come through for you in the chat, okay? And the question is from Ari, and Ari asks, Ari says, I appreciate the panel very much. For Ms. Carroll, I have a question. Which paragraph were you referring to when you were talking about LSVD Cologne? I think you might have also been mentioning the Article 17, but I'm not sure. So this is a question from Ari Care.
Yes, I was referring to the 17 because that's what we actually and somehow try to convince the migration office. If we start to get in touch with those people, because honestly, mostly the problem is that the moment that's my experience, the moment we get in touch with the asylum seekers. In terms of the Dublin procedure, we are mostly already that they got a negative decision, and then that's very difficult to get then another time in touch with the Bundesamt, with the migration office. But that's what we started and somehow to refer to the 17. Yeah, and in my opinion, that's the only chance we might get on. Yeah, I would love to add something, because in my opinion, there's always in somehow a misunderstanding of the family reunion, because we really have to consider that family reunion is only regarding minor and their parents and their relatives, and the other way around. And what we are facing on in terms of homosexual is more often that we have really already adults, and that they do have partners. And so we are mostly, if we talk about family, we talk about partners. And that's even for heterosexuals very difficult to get reunited with only a partner if you're not married. That's something I wanted to add by the time. Perhaps we have Irene now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. I mean, I think that all of you who've spoken so far have mentioned something really important, which is, what constitutes a family under Dublin III, and what actually is the reality of family experience for LGBTIQ plus refugees and asylum seekers, right? From what you're saying, even though there is some promise of being able to use Article 17, there's still the assumption of what constitutes a family within Dublin III can remain very problematic, because family is a source of persecution for queer refugees and asylum seekers. And then, as you both mentioned, Akram and Rania, the concept of chosen family, for the purposes of family reunification or for obtaining asylum with one's partner or a close person that does not have that biological relationship, is something I think a lot of asylum jurisdictions will still need time to learn about, and perhaps that's one of the frontiers that we face next. Okay, I'm just gonna thank you, Lilith, for your remarks in the Q&A about the concept of family. Really encourage people to weigh in. While Eleni is sorting out her audio Zoom connection, but you're here. Eleni, can you hear us? You are on mute. Eleni, can you try to unmute yourself?
I'm terribly sorry. The Council of Europe system does not like so much Zoom, so I had to go on my phone. My colleagues tried their best. I apologize. I was not able to listen to the last presentations, so I will try to come into the discussion now. Thank you very much for inviting the Council of Europe. I have a terrible flu and I am at home, and probably my voice is not the best for such a presentation, but I would like really to thank you. This is an important, a very important, I'm sorry, I'm using my phone, symposium. And I do hope that we'll have some follow-ups, because this is a topic that the Council of Europe has taken up for some years now, together with UNHCR. We are organizing capacity building trainings in the member states on this particular topic. We are hoping now to start cooperation with EASO on the same topic. So I would like to run you through the human rights protection established by the Council of Europe and its institutions. It's going to be probably a bit of boring presentation, but I am happy to share with you our presentation. It was prepared by my team. I have a lawyer working on this specific topic, so I'm a lawyer myself. So I will share with you after the meeting this presentation, because I think it's a very useful tool for the people concerned, but especially for lawyers working in the member states on this particular topic. So I will first present you our success story, and our success story is the European Court of Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the protection of asylum seekers through this system. So from the beginning, I have to clarify that the European Convention on Human Rights does not include the right to asylum. But the member states of the Council of Europe are under the obligation to secure to everyone within their jurisdiction, everyone, not only the citizens, everyone who is in the territory of the member state, including LGBTI asylum seekers, the respect of the rights guaranteed by the European Convention on Human Rights. So in this context, and in particular, we're talking about the 47 member states, which include, of course, the Dublin EU member states. In this context, and in particular concerning LGBTI persons, the most relevant rights are the Article 2, which guarantees the right to life, and Article 3, which prohibits torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. These articles have been interpreted by the European Court of Human Rights as providing protection against all forms of return to places where there is a real risk that an individual would be subjected to irreparable harm. So it is what we call the European Convention on Human Rights is a living instrument. So the court interprets the articles of the convention according to the current situation in the member states. So there is this an evolving case law concerning the asylum LGBT asylum seekers. So the court's interpretation of the Articles 2 and 3 has evolved, as I said, and into an expression. So you have to keep this expression, is very important, is the non-refoulement principle. Articles 2 and 3 of the Convention also prohibit indirect refoulement, which means an expulsion to a state from where migrants may face further deportation without a proper assessment of their situation. So this of course, as you can imagine, applies in the context of the Dublin regulation, and this is the topic we're discussing today. So Article 2 and 3, indirect refoulement. The court has interpreted these obligations to include that an LGBTI person risking persecution amounting to the treatment contrary to Article 2 and 3 of the Convention on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity may not be sent back to their country of origin. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that asylum seekers should not be required to lie or to exercise restraint about their sexual orientation or other protected characteristics. In its recent non-refoulement case concerning the risk of ill treatment for reasons of sexual orientation upon return to Gambia, so this is a very recent judgment, it's B&C against Switzerland, 2020. The court also clarified that the lack of an inadequate risk assessment by domestic authorities would breach Article 3. I should mention that in the past, similar cases have been either struck out or have been declared inadmissible. So you can see how the European Court of Human Rights jurisprudence has evolved and now covers also this particular case of violation. And it is a great tool in the hands of practitioners, this jurisprudence. Another article, which is of the relevance in the context of LGBTI asylum seekers, is the Article 5, which allows for detention only in a limited number of circumstances. In our context, this concerns the detention of LGBTI persons pending the assessment of the asylum claim, or if their claim has been rejected, it concerns their detention pending their deportation. So I give you an example. In a case against Hungary in 2016, OM versus Hungary, the court found that the authorities had failed to make an individualized assessment or take into account the applicant's vulnerability within the detention facility when they ordered the applicant's detention without considering the extent to which vulnerable individuals were safe or unsafe in custody among other detained persons. In this case, the court held that LGBTI individuals are a particularly vulnerable group of asylum seekers. In addition, in the recent case, again versus Hungary, Zrana versus Hungary, 2020, the court extended the right of legal gender recognition for transgender refugees. The court noted that the domestic system for LGR had excluded the applicant simply because he did not have a birth certificate from Hungary, a change in the birth register being the way name and gender changes were legally recognized. So some important judgments The most important are, of course, the ones of 2020, which the court has issued, and now we are expecting the execution of these judgments. Now, the Council of Europe in 2010 adopted a specific recommendation, the Committee of Ministers recommendation, to member states on measures to combat discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity. So this is our mandate. The SOGI unit operates based on this mandate of this recommendation of the Committee of Ministers, and this covers different rights. And of course, the right to asylum is one of those. It is the first instrument of its kind, and it is specific, identifies specific measures to be adopted and effectively enforced by member states in order to combat discrimination based on SOGI. So this we are working through our cooperation activities with member states for the implementation of this particular recommendation, and of course, through the execution of judgments for the member states that they are concerned. So this, as I mentioned before, there is a specific thematic section on the right to asylum and calls on member states to respect the principle of non-refoulement, to adopt measures to protect LGBT asylum seekers and those deprived of their liberty from risk or physical and verbal violence, to ensure the access to information. Every 4 years, my unit is going back to the member states and asks whether they have fully implemented or not this recommendation. So this is what we did. We call it a review of the implementation of the recommendation. This is what we did in 2018. So in the specific, and this was the second review since the recommendation was adopted. So in this specific topic, a majority of states reported that a well-founded fear of persecution based on SOGI is recognized. So it seems that there is this type of recognition in the majority of our member states. In the most of cases, of course, the recognition is indirect. So we have to trust the responses that the member states gave to the Council of Europe. Not all Council of Europe member states have explicitly recognized sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics in their asylum laws, and this we can confirm. The explicit recognition in domestic law of LGBTI protection needs more attention. This is the recommendation that we gave back to the member states following this, this exercise. Now, the legal protection of transgender asylum seekers has rarely been addressed in the responses. So it seems that in this particular topic, member states have not done their homework, and this raises particular concerns for the protection of the rights of transgender refugees. On the other hand, it is important that the specific measures are implemented to ensure that transgender asylum seekers have access to staff appropriately trained. And this is the work that the SOGI unit is trying to do with other agencies to provide specific training. Now, always about transgender asylum seekers, measures addressing the specific conditions of asylum centers. One of our recommendations must be implemented to ensure that transgender asylum seekers have access to particular healthcare, if required, such as hormone replacement therapy, or to prevent discrimination, harassment, and violence, both from staff or other asylum seekers. So this is this review of the implementation recommendation took place in 2018. We are working now on a thematic review. for the time being, the LGBTI asylum seekers, it was not part. In 2021, we dealt with illegal gender recognition legislation, but it's going to be one of our thematic reviews. So we'll see what the member states have achieved, and of course, we are working with them to improve the legal and policy framework on this particular topic. Another institution of the Council of Europe, which has also a monitoring role, but not only, is the Commissioner for Human Rights. And we think in 2018, the Commissioner for Human Rights issued a human rights comment on the protection of LGBT asylum seekers. So it is very important source of information, and not only for the member states, but the Commissioner repeats the standards that they are established by the Council of Europe. So she called on the member states to ensure that their laws explicitly recognize a well-founded fear of persecution on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. And she found that there is an urgent need for practical guidance and training for all those involved in the asylum procedure, including interviewers, decision makers, and interpreters, and that the authorities should make full use of resources already available and cooperate with the civil society groups to develop trainings. In addition, she recommended that member states engage in further research and exchange about how to ensure safe reception conditions for LGBT asylum seekers. So the Commissioner, in her monitoring work and in her field visits, asylum seekers is one of the priorities. She always takes up the topic of LGBT asylum seekers. Specific recommendations are made to the governments, and exchange of letters takes place after each visit. They're not necessarily public, but this is part of the diplomacy that the Council of Europe applies with the member states. Finally, I would like to run you through the work of the European Commission against racism and intolerance, which is another monitoring body of the Council of Europe. And ECRI in 2015, in its fifth report on Estonia, noted the Estonian domestic legislation does not explicitly recognize persecution on the basis of sexual orientation as a valid ground for asylum requests. So a specific recommendation to Estonia was made, but as I said, this is not the only country. The last point that we like to take up is the work of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, an extensive work on asylum, on LGBT, and specifically on asylum. Just to remind you, there is a resolution of 2015 after Dublin, the urgent need for a real European asylum system. This is a resolution which was adopted in 2015 and takes up the specific situation of the Dublin system. So I will probably have the opportunity to share with you some good practices, but I will stop here. Thank you very much, and apologies for this connection issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleni, for your patience and for joining us despite your cold and the connection issues. It is really wonderful to hear your perspectives on what the Council of Europe has been doing quite actively to advance on the topic of ensuring protection for LGBTIQ+ people who are seeking protection in Europe. And it's great to hear about your cooperation efforts with the United Nations Refugee Agency and also with EASO. Thank you also for kind of drawing our attention back to the protections that are set forth in the European Convention on Human Rights, and helping us understand a bit about the recommendations that you're implementing or asking member states to implement, and that review process. So it is really quite encouraging to hear that many states within the 47 state bloc of the Council of Europe do recognize well-founded fear of persecution based on SOGI, although this is not the case for every country. And it's also really encouraging to hear about the work that you're doing to protect trans refugees and asylum seekers, which I do think is one of the so-called frontier challenges that LGBTIQ plus displaced people and everyone who's working with them face today. So thank you again for helping us to understand a little bit of the complexity of the EU human rights and asylum architecture as it applies to sexual orientation and gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. And we do look forward to hearing your recommendations. Just checking the time here. Now we're going to go to the section on what can we do better. Okay, so what is already working? I think we were going to really do a deep dive into challenges. We could be on this Zoom call all week, but every one of you is also engaged in work that is already having some positive results, even if they don't seem to be monumental. But I think it will be really helpful to hear your views on what is working or what could be considered, as a good practice to take forward. So a good practice that you're either already doing or that could be put into place. Would anybody like to go first? I'm seeing some people being a little reticent, so I'm going to call on people. I'm going to call on Rania first. Rania, you're on mute.
I'm still a little bit puzzled by what Eleni said, because I do see mainly the problem that if we are facing on Dublin III, all the member countries, or what my experience is, Germany is not considering that as asylum procedure. That's my first concern. It's always concerned as kind of free or something, a part of the asylum procedure, and that's what we need to change. The question of non-refoulement, that's something what in my daily business that had been more questions for Afghanistan and so in the past, but we are facing on in the Dublin procedure mainly that this group is not really considered as a special group, as a vulnerable group, and what I do expect every time in avoiding is this highly barrier of real risk or real fear what they are facing on in other European member states. And I would really love that we will come to the conclusion that this group needs more protection than that, because it's a vulnerable group, and the barrier of that they need to prove that in another European country they are really facing in humanitarian conditions. That's something that I, as a lawyer, I will not get the right in front of court, because the court will not accept that I consider France as not being able to take care about LGBTIQ plus members in general. So that's what I'm facing on, and I'm really dreaming of that we might come in the future to the conclusion that this group needs more protection, really apart what's considered from the humanitarian rights, because but that's something for another panel. that I have really to fight on for the asylum. Then further on, for some countries where we would all, or where we all know that they have problems, but here in Germany they are not considered as asylum seekers in the end. So I would love to bring an example what I did in the past, because in my daily practice I need to stay with the people, or with the person in front of me on a focus, and in claiming just to the High Court is not helping him in his daily stay here in Europe. So I was facing on in the past really it was two mostly at the same time, people who came over France, asylum seekers, gay ones. And I said to them, okay, we might claim against, but I said I will have no chance if I have to explain in front of court that they are really facing high risk as homosexuals in France. That's more and less ridiculous. They would say to me, "Are you?" Yeah, but we all know that in general, asylum seekers in France, they just as they are accepted, they are living on the street. So what then came up to me is, okay, we really try in somehow to grab the authorities by something which is also written in the regulation, that they might really try to get an audit transfer. And it was almost taking me as much work as claiming and everything, because I think they were so stubborn that somebody was really calling, and I said, okay, we want to do that. And first question, or the first answer was, okay, if he books a flight and he's paying for everything, he might go to France. And I said, you are not allowing them to work. Who should pay for the flight to France? That's very interesting. And I said, okay, no, then you might do that. Then it will cost Germany a price of police and everything. But in one of the cases, and that was really something I'm still happy with the I managed to get in touch with France Homophobie, an organization. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so really we managed to organize everything in France, and I convinced the administration that they really were kind of giving me the day of the flight number and everything. We couldn't cancel the police getting him in the in the camp. Was very interesting for the police to grab somebody for a transfer who was waiting in front of the building with his backpacks and everything. And finally, he went to Marseille, and there was somebody from the organization really waiting for him, and they were taking care. And I was really touched because they hosted him for several months. Just the asylum procedure went on, and finally he got accepted in France. That's what I did. But I felt really sad to realize that even for the administration to go this way, it took me so much time to convince the administration that he will really go freely, and that they really do not need to doubt that he will really go. So that I said, normally it's implemented in the regulation as possibility, but that's not something which is lived. And unfortunately, the other practice, what I do see, what in Bavaria started to be part, is the church asylum, because I do not see that I will. Yeah, perhaps it might be a chance now to get to win a claim against a transfer to Poland or Hungary, but I do even still have doubts. that for a Dublin case, I would win that. So what I know most LGBTI plus Dublin cases are facing on actually is church asylum to pass over the 6 months delay, and we are fighting for not prolongation of 18 months. That's what actually is. So I'm honestly really counting on the future that new discussions over these accordings come more to the conclusion that we need more respectation of this vulnerable group.
Thank you so much, Rania. I really appreciate your sharing from your experience working with the CSOs in transfer countries in France, for example, and the need to make us national authorities understand and take seriously, recognize the real risks faced by LGBTIQ plus people, indeed a very vulnerable group. And thank you also for mentioning church asylum, something we could get a little more deeply into in another panel. Before we go on, I just want to recognize that we have 15 minutes left in our webinar. The time has flown by, and I'm going to ask your forgiveness in advance if we move a little bit quickly through the next set of recommendations from Akram and Eleni, because we have several questions that I would like to touch on before we wrap up in 15 minutes. So Akram and Eleni, which one of you would like to go next?
Yeah, I can just wrap up.
Sure.
I have very general recommendation at the EU level.
Okay.
So as I just wanted to sum up as we can see from the today's discussion, there's a pressing need to actually reform the Dublin procedure at its core. And it should start with the rethinking of how to build a genuine and fair common asylum policy. So first of all, it should be fair and efficient one for the applicants and not for the states as it is at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But we do see that in the current reform, which is going on under the this new pact on asylum and migration, which Commission put forward, that most of the provisions of the current Dublin system remains, and the criteria they also remain. And we do understand it's because of the highly political opposing interests that they should find a compromise. But at the moment, during this revision of the this common European asylum system, and specifically on how the application will be reviewed within the European Union, within the members of the European Union, we would recommend that what was said already, that at the least in the criteria, or maybe not only criteria, but also the vulnerability aspect of the applicant should be explicitly mentioned in the regulation, and also it should explicitly mention LGBTI people as a group for the exceptions. So this would be the least what the Commission, Parliament, and the Council could do at the moment. And I will stop here. I can also give some of the examples, but I think I will stop just here and give to Eleni.
Yes, thank you. Just to reply to the question before, I mean, following the review of the implementation of the recommendation, the member states reported that a well-founded fear of persecution based on SOGI is recognized. Now, this is what the member states said to the Council of Europe. From our research, we know that not all Council of Europe member states have explicitly recognized SOGI as in their asylum law. So I confirm that definitely we need more protection, and we need to work with member states, not only Germany, but definitely Germany on this particular topic. Now, recommendations, as I said, they have been formulated by the Commissioner for Human Rights, and our Parliamentary Assembly has already expressed criticism about the functioning of the Dublin system, concluding that the system is dysfunctional. It is not effective and is certainly not efficient in achieving its basic aims, and its operation in practice has an unacceptably high human cost for asylum applicants and resource costs to participating states. So, so this is the Parliamentary Assembly called on the European Union and its member states to urgently revise the Dublin regulation. This is what I can say for the time being. I think the most strong protection system is the one that is established by the European Convention on Human Rights. And there you don't have only recommendations, but you have case law judgments that the member states should effectively implement.
Thank you so much, Eleni, for helping us remember, the foundational buttress of that, which is the European Convention on Human Rights, and for helping us understand, what the Council of Europe is doing to suggest improvements on the common European asylum system. I think from what all of you have shared, there is a need to update it so that it is fair and accountable to asylum seekers, in as much as it tries to do that with member states. So moving along, we'd like to present a couple of questions for you. I think we have 9 minutes left. And the first question is, and any of you can jump in on this, came from a little earlier in our webinar today. Claudia is asking, is the Istanbul Convention, which combats gender-based violence, specifically Articles 61 and 62, can these be used as a ground for humanitarian protection? Does anyone want to weigh in on that?
Well, this is a Council of Europe convention, and there should be, it is a question addressed to me, although I don't work for the Istanbul Convention. And of course, the Istanbul Convention covers the cases of lesbian and transgender women. And of course, it can be used in the cases of when requesting international protection. Of course, as you probably know, the Istanbul Convention has a binding effect only for the member states that they have signed and ratified the convention.
Thank you so much, Eleni. We have a question from Sophia Sisaku, who asks, do you think that considering LGBTIQ+ asylum seekers' claims for family reunification with their partners in cases where the partner is a refugee or an asylum seeker, under Article 17(2) of the Dublin III, not under binding provisions of the regulation, that would be Articles 9 and 10, would this constitute a discrimination towards LGBTIQ+ families? So using Article 17 of Dublin III.
I can jump in, Irene.
Sure.
As I touched these articles. I think actually that as we can see in the Article 2 of the definition as to what's the family member, this is, it can be interpreted as a LGBT inclusive, as maybe Sophie already knows, but it also depends on what in these member states, in the specific member states, who they consider as spouses, for example, legally, and they also require very different types of document, how you can prove that you are in the long, stable relations to be considered, for example, as your spouse or de facto spouse. And that's why it should be considered under the mentioned articles. But I was talking that Article 17 can be also used in the cases when there is no legal ground at the national level to, for example, to consider de facto families as a families under their national laws. They can also apply this. And if country doesn't apply, it's my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, it will be discrimination based on the sexual orientation or gender identity or sex characteristics. In this case, if LGBT families, de facto families, are not recognized, but at the same time, the heterosexual families are recognized, so that we can see why it might be happening. But at the same time, I think that under the EU law, what's defined as a family so far, I think has been under the discretion of the member states. Yeah, until recently. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rania, before I ask you to unmute, we have one final question coming in from Pavel Matuz at the City of Leipzig.
I only wanted to add something, because your question was, sorry to add, because we need probably to clarify the other question, because in the beginning it was two asylum seekers or already somebody who was accepted in one country. That's something what we really have to distinguish. Because if we do have a really accepted asylum, so-called refugee in Germany, and he went to be reunion with his partner, then we are out of the Dublin III accordings. That's only was what I really wanted to put in, because then we are really on another level, because then we are in the ordinary familial reunion.
Right. Thank you for clarifying, Rania. Finally, before we wrap up, one last question from Pavel, the City of Leipzig Migrant Council, who asks, could you please share any experience or ideas of working for LGBTIQ+ refugees at local and regional policy levels? Any thoughts? City councils play a really important role in welcoming and integrating queer refugees and asylum seekers. Go ahead, Rania. You're on mute.
I really, I'm fretting on really often the problem that a lot of those refugees coming here is really not aware that LGBTI plus problems are really something what they absolutely need to mention. And I would really love to first of all also the Office of Migration that we all insist that in their first questionnaires what they get, there's never shown the word LGBTIQ as vulnerable group, or in the questionnaires, really in all the Dublin procedure, it's not showing up. So I would really love if all these organizations, they would really start to put in all those informations they distribute to the people. In the beginning, that there must be some informations about LGBTIQ. In terms of, that's what we discussed with those social workers in one time. Only a rainbow sticker on a head screen might symbolize something that the person feels ready to touch, or to talk about the topic. Or flyers lying around that there are really kind of consultancy possibilities, and that's really something what I really would wish to have since the beginning, because I'm realizing that the problem is really for them to get an access to the good informations from the beginning in arriving here.
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute left. May I invite the three speakers? You have about 10 seconds to share any last words, 10 seconds apiece, and then we're gonna close it for now. Okay, Akram.
Yes, thank you very much, Irene, for the very good, excellent moderation. And I also thank Eleni, Ronia, and Suma, even though she's not here, for sharing your also expertise, and I learned a lot. And at last, but not at the least, I want to thank you, all the organizers, for having us and actually having organized this really important meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, from my side, I have 10 seconds. So in these 10 seconds, I cannot develop the work of the Council of Europe in capacity building in member states. Definitely, the local dimension is very important. We are very new in this sector. I must, we build up our expertise as the UNHCR is the international organization dealing with this topic specifically, but we bring into the UNHCR's work and the EASO works our expertise on LGBTI issues. So we are starting now a quite ambitious program of capacity building in member states, especially the member states like Greece, Turkey, Switzerland, Ireland, in the member states where we know that their system needs to be improved, and to provide them with adequate tools to recognize and to protect LGBTI asylum seekers. So thank you very much for inviting Council of Europe. I do hope this is just a beginning. We will have the opportunity to share with you our work and to assist the people, the activists and the practitioners working in the field with the tools, and also to have some cooperation activities if they wish in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ronya, 10 seconds.
No, I also say thank you to everybody in joining, because it's really a topic which I am connected my heart on, and I really appreciate this kind of form of reunion, bringing all those different point of views together. This might really bring this topic forward, and I look forward that there might be some ameliorations in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, I just want to thank everyone here. Akram, Ronya, Eleni, Menja, Inez, Mohammed. I see Joe and Laura in the background. Suma has left the room. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join your conversation. It has been a real privilege and honor to moderate. I look forward to hearing about all your work, and I hope that there will be another conversation to come where we pick up on the excellent work that you're all doing. So thank you again.